All right, welcome back. Damn, that cookie was good. It was really good. In fact, I'm going to have a few more because there's nobody else here to eat them. Also, I'm doing this video from my office at Kent. It's like a ghost town in here. I truly am the king of Satterfield. There's nobody else around here. Uh, Future videos might come from home, and if you're really good and you're paying attention, there may be a few Charlie appearances. He usually finds a way to interrupt whatever I'm doing. I mean, whatever I'm doing, anything I'm doing. So he has a knack for that. So I have a feeling when I start doing videos from home, he'll upstage me and become the star of the show. All right, anyway, I want to get back to the questions on night number two, and your answers to these were this question was very good. Um, how were the Nazis able to accomplish this? And here I was kind of counting on a little bit of your previous knowledge. You probably had a Holocaust unit in school. You learned about the Holocaust. I hope you did. It shocks me to hear that in a lot of cases kids aren't getting this information, so they don't know what Auschwitz was. They don't know what the Holocaust was. It's really scary. But I got the sense talking to you that most, if not all of you, had had some kind of background in this. And even if you didn't, it's really why I included, and we talked about this last semester, it came up a little bit, the early warning signs of fascism uh, that was put together by Lawrence W. Britt. And so I included that because if you go down the list, and I'm not gonna, you can read these, and you probably have read them already, so I'm not gonna read all of these out loud again. But I will point out that this is how it's done. This is how it starts, and this is how fascism can take hold and convince the majority of people that what they're doing is the right thing to do. It usually includes or demands persecution of a minority, and so just go down the list. And the other reason I'm bringing this up is too, with the future paper coming up, where you get to choose your topic on your topic choice. Couple of different ways you can go about using this list, the early warnings of fascism. You can use it to show how it was carried out in the Holocaust. You can use it to show how these 14 things were used in other previous examples or other more current examples of genocide and Holocaust in our world. That's a question that you're going to be answering for the next WA, so I'm going to hold off on that. That'll be a video that we'll do next week. So you can use it in that way, or maybe even more terrifyingly, you can use it to show how we see elements of these 14 things happening in our world and our country. As you know, I try not to get too much into politics in class. I respect people's opinions on those things. But I don't think you have to stretch it too much to look over some of these things and see what's happening in our world. And, fascism is making a comeback around the world. We talked about this the other day in class. There was some moron who had a fascist flag at a Bernie Sanders rally. And you got to figure for every one person who does that, God knows how many people would have loved to have done that if they had the stupidity or the balls or whatever you want to call it, whatever prompted that guy to do it. So it was this one guy. You could say, oh, it's just one guy, but how many people looked at that and kind of went, yeah, good for him, and it's scary. So again, I have them in front of me as you do as well. A powerful and continuing nationalism. Hitler did that. I won't get into the history of it. Some of you know the history. After World War I, Germany lost the war, was devastated financially. All kinds of things were imposed upon them. And along came a leader who said, I can make, I hate to use this phrase, but I can make Germany great again. Um, and they followed him, and they believed him. And Germany at the expense of all others. And Germany was a great country, and is a great country today. Uh, but to use that nationalism to do evil is what fascism is all about. The disdain for the recognition of human rights. Because of fear of enemies and the need for security, the people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of need. So they look the other way when torture is done, executions, assassinations, etc., etc. Human rights go by the wayside. Identification of enemies and scapegoats for a uniting cause, and certainly we see this in the Holocaust. The Jews were made the scapegoats for all of Germany's problems, and people, non-Jews, bought into that. There was an enemy they could face and defeat. There was somebody responsible for this, and they needed to pay, and they needed to be punished. And Hitler was able to convince them that it was the Jews who were responsible. The people are rallied into a unifying patriotic frenzy over the need to eliminate a perceived common threat or foe. Racial, ethnic, religious minorities, liberals, communists, socialists, terrorists, etc. People are labeled that and then singled out and persecuted as enemies, as scapegoats. Number 4, supremacy of the military. So military budgets are built up. Hitler did that. Germany was very poor, but they still found money to build up a military and have great parades and great military parades through the streets. That's what you do. Soldiers and the military service are glamorized. Number 5, rampant sexism we see in most fascist states. The governments of fascist nations tend to be almost exclusively male-dominated. Under fascist regimes, traditional gender roles are made more rigid. Divorce, abortion, and homosexuality are suppressed. Well, I don't need to say anything about that, do I? Controlled mass media we see in fascist states. One of the first things you do is you control the media. You control the message. And you insert your own message. You insert your own propaganda. And if it doesn't line up with your vision of things or your version of things, it doesn't go out to people. Only the line we want you to see will go out. Sometimes the media is directly controlled by the government, but in other cases the media is indirectly controlled by government regulation or sympathetic media spokespeople and executives. Censorship, especially in wartime, is very common. And that's over the years, that's been one of the main excuses for censorship. Well, there's a war going on, so we have to censor information. We don't want any news that goes out that might endanger our mission or endanger our troops. And boy, once you institute that, then you can use that for a blanket of things. So controlled mass media or sympathetic media to the government cause is a characteristic of fascism. And again, we saw it in the Holocaust. I'm sure if you study other examples of genocide that's happened, and that, again, that's going to be one of the questions for the next WA, I think you'll probably see that as well. Obsession with national security. Fear is used as a motivational tool by the government over the masses. You see that. Religion and government are intertwined. We like to think in our country that there's a separation between church and state, but fascist governments don't do that. In many cases, there is a ruling religion as part of the regime. Corporate power is protected. The industrial and business aristocracy of a fascist nation are the ones who put the government leaders into power. And then they mutually benefit each other. Do you see that today in today's world? I think you do. Kind of sound like Mr. Rogers there. Did you see that, boys and girls? Not to make light of the situation, but, well, you know me. Anyway. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Oh, the fake news. You know, the sick left. Obsession with crime and punishment. Under fascist regimes, the police are given almost limitless power to enforce laws. Certainly that was true in the Holocaust. The Gestapo, if you're familiar with that concept, I won't get into that, but that was the police. Brutal police that did whatever the fascists and the Nazis wanted them to do. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Fraudulent elections. Now, what people forget is that Germany was once a democracy during this time, but it really operated as anything but a democracy, at least the way we like to see it. All right, so those are the 14 warning signs of fascism, or the 14 defining characteristics of fascism, might be a better way to put it since the title's right there. And again, a great paper topic would be to apply these to the Holocaust, apply them to some other example, you know, because we always ask ourselves, how did a relatively small group of people control the apparatus so that they could then turn the power against another section of the society? How did they get away? How did they get away with this? How are they able to do this? How are they able to convince people to do this? One of the things I talk about in class, I wish we had time to, like, back and forth, and it's just not just me blathering. But one of the things I talk about is, you know, Hitler was crazy. His henchmen were crazy. They were psychopaths. But the people who carried out the orders weren't crazy. They were people like you and me. They had families. I mean, I've seen Elie Wiesel talk about this. And by the way, we won't have time to show this in class. Sometimes I like to show this. There's a great thing on YouTube. Some 10, 12 years ago, Elie Wiesel revisited Auschwitz, and I think it might have been for his last time. He might have come back in the intervening years. He passed away a few years ago. But he went with Oprah, and it's like an hour special. And basically, it's Oprah and he walking through Auschwitz and him giving his recollections. It's very, very powerful. And I really suggest you watch that. And one of the things he talks about, one of the things he says in this is, you know, when she looks at the horrors, and it's become like a museum of sorts, and they come across one scene where there's mountains and mountains of hair, human hair. There's another place where behind glass there are like millions of shoes and baby clothes and things that were kept. And she said, how could one human being do this to another? And he kind of says something along the lines, well, I mean, they were people like you and me. You know, they had families. They loved music. They you know, they weren't monsters. And yet they did this. They did this thing. And we have to try to figure out what convinces people who aren't psychopaths to do something that they must know in their hearts is wrong. And maybe in a later video we'll talk a little bit about this. There are different ways you convince somebody to do something that maybe isn't in their heart. They know in their heart's not right. Maybe you bribe them, maybe you threaten them, maybe you do whatever it takes, or like I said, you convince them through these fascist techniques, and you convince them at an early age. This is important too. When Hitler came to power, one of the first things he did is he put the Nazi propaganda in schools. So this is in the early 30s. So by the late 30s, you had a whole generation of kids who grew up on this stuff and believed it and were ready to go to war with it. They weren't crazy. They weren't insane. They weren't psychopaths. But they they had this mentality. So again, a great paper topic to show how these characteristics of fascism are shown in other examples, whether we call it fascism or not, or look at the world today and see if it's going on today and how it's going on and where it's going on as a warning sign. All right, the last thing I wanted to bring up in this video, and then I'll give you another video after I get your responses to questions 5 and 6, which is the next WA. Question 3 was, what is left for him? And what I wanted to point out here is that a number of you said, well, he had his life, but really didn't have much left in that. The one thing I want to say, and a couple of people mentioned it, but most did not, because and this is why I make the big money. I can point this out to you. What does he have left? This 15-year-old kid lost his father, lost his family for the most part, lost his home, no place to go back to, nothing. He has one thing. He has his story to tell. And that's what he devoted the next 40-some years, 50-some years of his life. I mean, he didn't, at 15 years old, sit down and write night. I mean, he had to grow up and, become a mature individual, and it wasn't until much later, kind of like Vonnegut, he had to process it and figure out how he was going to tell his story. But once he became an adult and he knew what his life work was going to be, and that was to bear witness, to tell his story to whoever would listen. Through books like Night, through speeches, he spoke extensively. He taught at a university. If you see the stuff in the packet, you know that we were able to correspond with him a couple of times, which was a great thrill for me. And we sent the correspondence through the college that he was teaching at. So he taught extensively, he wrote extensively, he spoke extensively. He spoke at Kent State, I think, in 2013 or 14, around this time of year. Powerful speaker. And that's what he has left, to tell his story, so that we still read about it today. And as frightening as it is, I think it's as timeless and as important and as relevant today as it ever has been. We'd like to think, well, we defeated Nazism in World War II. We won the Great War, and democracy prevailed. But fascism has not died out. So we have to be ever vigilant. That's what he would say if he were around today. And that's what he said in one of the many things he said in the speech was, this is why I tell my story, so that history doesn't repeat. We don't keep making the same mistakes. And I've mentioned this in class before too, in connection with Vonnegut. He regarded what he did with some regret in saying that I've tried for the last X number of years to tell my story and write about it, but words fail. I mean, I feel like a failure sometimes, because there are just some things that can't be conveyed in words. But yet, that's what I'm going to try to do, and that's what he devoted his life to. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, just an incredible individual. And you've read his story, and you saw what he came from and what he experienced. And he took that, and he took his skills as a writer and a speaker to tell his story, to bear witness. And that's what he has left. it's a great gift that he shared with us, and it's a great thing that it's a great way that he lived his life, and we're all the beneficiaries of it. Everybody who reads his book and ever reads a speech of his or see, I mean, he's on. There's a lot of things on YouTube that you can look up for Elie Wiesel. I remember up until a few years before his death, he would, every time something happened in the world, one of the first guests on a talk show was Elie Wiesel. People wanted to know what his take was on this world situation or that world situation. Um, so just a great, great man. And that's what he has left. All right, I'm going to end this now. This will be our part 2. After you have done the WA, the next WA, in which you answer the question, what are some other examples that are similar to the Holocaust? And again, that's a great paper topic. Number 6, I ask you to ask, why do you think the reading of night is still relevant today? Although I guess maybe I've given away some of those answers. Don't cheat. Don't steal my answer. But we'll wrap it up now, and I'll be back again with, we'll talk about those questions too. All right, until then, Charlie says hi. I'm going to have another cookie. I'll have about 4 more cookies, and we'll see you soon. I miss you. Be safe and be well.